La da 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 la da da. La da 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 da. La da 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 da. La da 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 da. La da 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 da. La da 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 da. La da 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 da. La da 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 da. La da 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 da. La da 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 da. La da 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 da. Alabadam bam badum, badum bum badum, balabadam bam badam, bam boy, buludum bum badum, aladadam dum de dam, bulubudum bum badum, lum bum bum, alabadabadabadum bum, labadabadada. Dum ba da ba da da dum dum, la da 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 dum, la da 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 dum, la da da de, la la ba do, la ba de, la boom boom, be boom.
Almost 15 years ago, Sir Shridath Ramphal, or Sonny as he is known to many, delivered a lecture in Grenada entitled, "Is the West Indies West Indian?" It exemplifies his unique blend of erudition and eloquence, distilling complex arguments with clarity. It also makes observations that are still relevant today, or, due to the press of world events, have once again become so. Here are some extracts. As all Grenadians know, it was here in St. George's 95 years ago that T. A. Marichaud flew from the masthead of his pioneering newspaper, the West Indian, the banner, "The West Indies must be West Indian." And on that banner, West Indian was symbolically one joined-up word, from the very first issue on 1st of January 1915. What was Teddy Marichaud signaling almost a century ago? What was he proclaiming? To what destination was he bound? That first issue looked to, and I quote, "the day when our islands, linked together in an administrative and fiscal union, the West Indian Dominion will take its place, small though they may be, in the glorious empire." End quote. Marichaud was not alone. There were others from other islands, like Captain Cipriani of Trinidad, and Ball of Dominica, and Critchlow of British Guyana, and Grantley Adams of Barbados, and Bradshaw of St. Kitts. They were a collective, these early regionalists, not yet bound by a blueprint of structured unity, but united by an intuitive awareness that if they were to go forward to the goal of freedom from a still cramping colonialism in their several homes, they had to struggle together in their regional homeland, that the West Indies had to be West Indian. In the slogan was a double entendre. To be West Indian was both the goal of self-determination attained and the strategy of unity for reaching and sustaining it. That was in the 1920s and 30s. As we ponder that goal and strategy still unfulfilled by us, it is intriguing to remember that, at that same time, today's united Europe had just fought one civil war and was about to fight another. Of course, our goal of freedom kept changing its form as the world changed. Internal self-government in the pre-war years, formal independence in the post-war years, the reality of freedom in the era of globalization, overcoming smallness in a world of giants. But the strategy of regional unity, the strategy of oneness, would not change, at least not nominally. We called it federation, integration, the OECS, CARIFTA, CARICOM, the CSME, the CCJ. It is that variable success that today begs the question, is the West Indies West Indian? Nearly 100 years after Marichaud asserted that we must be, are we yet? Worse still, are we less so than we once were? As West Indians, we have always faced a basic contradiction of oneness and otherness, a basic paradox of kinship and alienation. Much of our history is the interplay of these contrarieties, but they are not of equal weight. The very notion of being West Indian speaks of identity, of oneness. That identity is the product of centuries of living together, and is itself a triumph over the divisive geography of an archipelago which speaks to otherness. Today, CARICOM and all it connotes is a hallmark of that triumph, and it is well to remember the processes which forged it, lest we forget and lose it. The West Indies cannot be West Indian if West Indian affairs, regional matters, are not the unwritten premise of every government's agenda, not occasionally, but always, not as ad hoc problems, but as the basic environment of policy. It is not so now. In the 21st century, despite all we know in our minds of the brutality of the global environment and the need for collective action to survive it, the isolationist claims of local control still smother the demands of unity of purpose and action. We are still so many plantation enclaves obsessed with outdoing each other. It is puzzling that it should be so, for we have assuredly made large gains in what unity most demands: identity. There may be exceptions, but does not every citizen of every CARICOM country regard himself or herself as a West Indian? Not first and foremost, perhaps, but after his or her island identity, and I regard Belize, Guyana, and Suriname as islands for this purpose. There may be grouses, even anger, at not being treated properly at immigration counters. But that is because, as West Indians, we expect to be treated better. Our anger hinges not on the absence of identity, but on its assumed reality, on the conviction that our common identity is not a garb we wear outside, but shed when we come home. We groan together when the West Indian cricket grovels, and jump together when it triumphs. What is all this but identity? It is not an identity crisis that we face. We are a family. We know we are. But our family values are less sturdy than they should be. Those values that should make regional unity real, should move it from rhetoric to reality, should make integration an intuitive process, and the CSME a natural bonding. Until we live by these values, smoothing out the wrinkles so that all the family prospers, we degrade that identity. CARICOM is essentially about people, about West Indian people. But, in truth, it is an infusion of people power that is needed to resuscitate CARICOM.
Da dum dum da da dum dum dum. La da dum dum da di di. Lumba dum ba dum bum bum bye. Lam bum bum ba di dum. Lam bum bum ba die la bo die. Da da die die di dum dum. La da da dum do dum doy. La dum da do doy doy. Lumbo dim ba dum bum bum bye. Lumbo dim bum bo boy. Lumbo di da da die die die. Lumbo dum bo dum. Di boom, lo do dum, do. Ba dam bam bam ba, lumbo dum ba. Ba dam be da boom, be do dum. Boom, boom, bum, ba dam, bam ba di, lu boom, boom, bum, ba do do. Lam ba dam, bam, bam, bay. Lumbo doombo doombo boom.
Aftermath of Empire. The novels of Roy A.K. Heath was written by Ameena Gafoor and published by the University of the West Indies Press in 2017. It has a sumptuous cover adorned with a painting by her friend and colleague, Bernadette Indira Prasad. The book begins with two quotations worthy of note. Every line we succeed in publishing today is a victory wrested from the powers of darkness. Walter Benjamin, Selected Writings. Living in a borrowed culture, the West Indian, more than most, needs writers to tell him who he is and where he stands. V.S. Naipaul, The Middle Passage. This short extract from Ameena's introduction provides ample evidence of her scholarship and the ease with which she bundled multiple sources and strands of thought to craft a coherent and elegant analysis. This introductory study of Heath's novels is an attempt to critically appraise them as valid reinterpretations of a chronically disheveled society from which the author himself took flight. The landscape and social reality of Heath's fictional work are recognizably and uncompromisingly located in the city of Georgetown and its suburbs in Guyana, a former British colony on the northeastern rim of the South American mainland and linked to the West Indies by a shared history of slavery and indentureship. This work seeks to trace the writer's vision of man and society, to relate the fictional world of the text to the social and cultural context that informs them, to examine Heath's stylistic technique, to inquire in what ways novels might be significantly different from those of other West Indian novelists, to inquire in what ways the novels might have drawn from Guyanese writers before Heath, to correct false critical impressions and broaden the scope of existing criticism, to place the body of writing within a literary convention and, ultimately, to expand the critical space. Heath's first published work, A Man Come Home, 1974, is set in South Georgetown in a Guyana that has newly gained political independence. At the center of this work is the Foster family. Foster, his common-law wife, Christine, and their adolescent daughter, Melda. Foster, a cooper whose skills have become obsolete since the introduction of a pure water system to the city, supplements his meager income as a lampshade maker with regular remittances from Benny, his son who lives in Canada. Another grown, permanently unemployed sunbird lives with his girlfriend Stephanie in a Broad Street range yard close by his father's Princess Street cottage. These two families are linked by a friend named G, a baker's assistant who lives with his woman Muriel in a Ben Street range yard. G is a leech who preys shamelessly on both families. In Guyana, range yards, derogatorily referred to as tenements or slums, evolved out of the migration of freed laborers and time-expired indentured laborers to the city, where they resorted to various menial jobs to survive. Over time, this movement intensified with a desire among the rural population to access better jobs and prestigious secondary schools for their children. Working class people gravitated to the congested areas in South Georgetown in the wards of Boystown, Charlestown, and Whitmanville. In the west of the city, in what is now known as Tiger Bay, and on Lombard Street along the waterfront. Migration from villages to the margins of the city not only swelled the seams of the city, but also severely tested its infrastructure. While not all emigres headed for the poorer parts of the city, the range yards are marked by human congestion, chronic poverty, underdevelopment, and neglect. Harsh realities that reinforce a debilitating class divide. The backyard communities outside Port of Spain, Trinidad, for example, Laventille, and on the outskirts of Kingston, Jamaica, for example, Tivoli, have all the features of the Guyanese range yard and often take on a more dramatic life of their own, with their own militancy and codes of conduct. C.L.R. James, arguably the first Caribbean novelist to portray the realism of the backyard in Minty Alley, 1936, depicts in an earlier short story. Every street in Port of Spain proper can show you numerous examples of the type. A narrow gateway leading into a fairly big yard on either side of which run long, low buildings, consisting of anything from 4 to 8 rooms, each about 12 feet square. In these live, and have always lived, the porters, the prostitutes, cartmen, washerwomen, and domestic servants of the city. Before James, Eric Walron had published Tropic Death, 1926, perhaps the first substantial collection of short stories set in Guyana and the Caribbean to have depicted the realism of the Yard. While the poet Martin Carter anguishes over my strangled city, and Rupal Monar has written amply about the lives of the East Indian indentured laborers on the sugar estates, Roy Heath remains the only Guyanese novelist who has a sustained body of work depicting the psyche of the range yard dweller and how he negotiates survival and existence.
Dave Martins wrote a column in a local newspaper, the Stabroek News, for several years. This piece was called Pomeroon Times. It has been slightly edited. Guyana is such a vast and multi-dimensional kind of country that one could write a column about the different aspects of the place every week for a year and still not cover it all. One such slant for me would definitely be the Pomeroon River, where I spent many August holidays. I was a student at St. Stanislaus College on a scholarship, and the Martins family was living at Vredenhoop. My father, Joseph Francis Martins, son of an immigrant family from Madeira, had 2 farms in the Pomeroon, one at Martindale, about 2 miles from Charity, and one directly across the river from it at Cozier. Folks who know the river well, famed broadcaster Joseph Retz Pereira being one, his mother was Claudia, a daughter from my father's first marriage, can attest to the often turbulent nature of the river, known for its angry spring tides and frequent flooding of agricultural lands. The Pomeroon was also a repository for the Amerindian culture, producing the likes of political leader Stephen Campbell and his son, esteemed musician David Campbell, among many others. Looking back on it, years after I had migrated to Canada and later the Cayman Islands, Guyana has remained an anchor for me, with the Pomeroon and the Rupununi savannas in particular being special pieces of the puzzle. From as early as I can remember, there was some sort of mystical connection for me with this river, partly propelled, I assume, from the physical nature of the place. With no electricity and no roads, you went everywhere by boat. There was also this very convoluted mix of different races, battling the combination of scorching hot days, shivering cold nights, hordes of mosquitoes, frequent floods with seawater destroying crops, bolstered by a powerful sense of family and brotherhood, with an array of boats on the river, exchanging greetings and spontaneous visits. Known for its abundance of fruits, particularly coconuts, citrus, and mangoes, the Pomeroon was heaven for a barefoot country boy like me from West End, both for the produce and for the metal shed area my father had at Martindale for drying the coffee beans for the prized Pomeroon coffee. As a youngster, I caught hell from my mother for my blackened short pants, caused by sliding down the galvanized sheets of the shed's roof on my backside. How I never got injured, God only knows. For the people who lived there then, and I assume it's this way still, there was a personal connection, a kind of family thing between them and the mighty waterway. Travelers going by would wave hello to people on shore, and I distinctly remember being in bed at night and feeling this sense of comfort from the sound of boats passing in the dark. If they had a horn, they would blow it. A lovely connection in the dead still Pomeroon night. A sudden, sharp howdy. The sense of community was strong and widespread. It was always about showing up powerfully at weddings or christenings or even birthdays. We didn't use the words among us, but this sense of family was always there. They didn't declare it openly, but that Pomeroon thing was a powerful fact in the lives of the ones who lived there, sharing, exchanging, intermarrying, and generally forging a bond that we could carry with us wherever the times of our lives took us. It was something one could almost touch. As rivers go, the Pomeroon is not what one would term big. At Martindale, for instance, my father's place, it was not even half a mile wide, and the water was generally not rough. Although we could catch hell for swimming in it as youths because of the presence of pirai and barracuda. It is a picturesque, meandering river, coming from the Atlantic coast, winding more or less northwesterly, and frequently joined by a variety of small creeks. There is also the human touch. The government steamers providing the regular transport service direct to Georgetown would stop at several of the private riverside stellings, like the one at Martindale, for cargo and passengers, and their arrival was truly a joyous time, with old friends and new ones coming together. Years later, I would mention this aspect and point out that in all those bustling stelling exchanges, I could not recall one angry altercation taking place in that crowded melee. It was river folks connecting, sharing, combining in a kind of unofficial family exchange by the riverside. Hectic, energetic, trading, bubbling, and, yes, noisy. Looking back now, I recognize that Pomeroon experience as putting me in touch with not just an area, but literally a way of life. Those of us who took those Pomeroon travels by bus or train and then by boat from Charity will know what I'm referring to and why it remains so vivid all these many years later. Pomeroon is much more than just the name of a place to me. It is a unique way of being and doing. It is both a river and a path for a people making their world, living their combined dreams, sleeping to the sound of a passing boat, and walking in the back dam with your dad, holding a banana leaf over your head, sheltering you from the rain. It's more than a river, it's a world. What I became as a songwriter is a largely mysterious process with many inputs, not all known to me. But one of the principal ones I do recognize is my sojourn in those long ago Pomeroon times. It was a grounding, as I know it was for Reds Pereira, part of my Pomeroon family, in a unique mix of many races, including Amerindians, living harmoniously together. I was not living there. I was truly an outsider, there for a couple weeks at a time because of my father. But I could recognize the glue it had become for me in those long-remembered Pomeroon times. It is a bond that remains to this day. Memories of a shared world, of days and nights very fondly known, apart from the mosquitoes, of course. If you want more detail, call up Reds Pereira. Tell him Dave sent you.
A reading by Ameena Gafoor on the novel The Wine of Astonishment by Earl Lovelace. The West Indian novel, generally speaking, was started with Beckles, Becker, Buckra Baby, 1903, and One Brown Girl in 1909, both works by a white Creole editor of Jamaica, Thomas Henry McDermott, alias Tom Redcan. Earl Lovelace's fourth published novel, The Wine of Astonishment, 1982, artistically recreates the struggle of a community of spiritual Baptists at Bonas, a rural village of South Trinidad, for the right to worship in a manner that is culturally meaningful to them. Even though the novel does not elaborate on the origins of Baptist worship, we notice elements of African cultural practices in the text. Spirit possession sessions, the sound of drums, loud singing and clapping hands. We may be tempted to see spiritual Baptists as essentially Christians who incorporated African elements into the Christianity imposed upon them by the New World. But research on the form of Baptist worship suggests a closer affinity with the Orisha faith of an African religion that came to the New World with West African slaves of the Yoruba tribe and survived the brutal institution of slavery when African religions were suppressed but practiced in secret. It is believed that the Baptist sect in Trinidad originated from North America, a group of former American slaves who had supported Britain during the War of American Independence, 1776, were rewarded for their loyalty with freedom and grants of land in South Trinidad when the British took control of the island in 1797. Orisha worship has evolved over time to be a unique indigenous religion in Trinidad, a religion that is vibrant, expressive, and dynamic. And Orisha is a spirit to the deity that reflects one of the manifestations of Olodumare, God, in the Yoruba spiritual and religious system. In The Wine of Astonishment, Lovelace focuses on the power of colonialization as the persecution of the Baptists, and not on the affinity of Baptist worship to the Orisha faith. It is from these cultural customs that the villagers gained spiritual comfort, cultural, psychic certainty, and a sense of identity as a people who belong to an ancestral culture. As one character in The Wine of Astonishment puts it, I quote, "White priests or Latin ceremonies, but it's not our own. Black people own it. We have this church where we gather to sing hymns and ring the bell and shout hallelujah and speak in tongues when the Spirit comes. And we carry the word to the downtrodden and the forgotten and the lame and the beaten, and we touch Black people's soul." End of quote. The modest hut at Banasi, where Baptists gather to worship, also serves as a community center where members can meet to socialize or offer moral support in times of need. Quote, "We preach the word, and those who have ears to hear, hear." After the service finished, the brethren could discuss together how the corn growing, how the children doing, for what price cocoa selling, and the men could know which brother they would lend a hand to in the coming week. And the sisters would find out who's sick from the congregation, so we could go and sit with her a little and help her out with the cooking for her children, or the washing, or the ironing. End of quote. On November the 20th, 1917, the colonial government passed a law prohibiting worship in churches of the Spiritual Baptists in Trinidad and Tobago, the Shelters Prohibition Ordinance. Local magistrates were given considerable power to deal with any lawbreakers, and the police often harassed the worshippers at Bonas. assaulting them with batons, marching them down to the police station to be charged with breaking the law if they attempted to worship secretly. Police harassment of the Baptists continued until 1951, when, after repeated effort to dismantle the oppressive law, the Prohibition Ordinance was finally appealed. During the 34 years of institutionalized discrimination, the church was moved several times, with Baptists knocking from pillar to post. Finally, the church stands on the edge of the village, marginalized and out of sight, far up in a wilderness place, a little mud hut hiding behind a row of half-dead mango trees. A lookout watches for the police. So if they creep upon us, we bolt through the bush in the night, running like thieves. Thank you.
So I'd like to say a few words in tribute, honor, and memory of Ameena Gafoor. Ameena was one of the loveliest and most generous persons that I have ever known. She retained a humility and a kindness, an innate kindness that touched so many lives and saved so many Guyanese lives throughout her own time on this earth. I well remember her incredible generosity, sustained generosity, when Guyana suffered from the big floods in, I think, 2005, 2006, where she donated so much through the Guyana Citizens Initiative, of which I and many others were a part. We could always count on Ameena, who used her money well, used her money and her advantage well throughout her lifetime in Guyana. As I said, in a very direct, humble way. Never any photo opportunity of Ameena Gafoor handing over anything to anybody ever. And I want to just to end by saying that, you know, her life's work will live on in the Arts Journal. And please, please, Guyanese, let us find a way of continuing to honor her name in some national way, and to make sure that we give a second lease of life in her memory to the wonderful Arts Journal. Thank you, Ameena.
Yes, one of the things that always bothered me is the absence of a range of biographies of Guyanese heroes and heroines who have made their commitment and their contribution to the development of Guyana. And I always found it strange that the University of Guyana, the English department, never really established a system of encouraging students when they're doing their final thesis or whatever, of being engaged in research for biographies. One of the things, there are two very, very well-written biographies on both Martin Carter and Wilson Harris. And both of those have been done by foreigners. They're well-produced, well done, great details, extremely well-researched. But for me, it's a profound regret that such writing did not come from a Guyanese source.
I've never met Ameena, but I have great respect and admiration for her for a couple of reasons. One, here we have a scholar, Indian by ethnicity, who transcends those divides of the Caribbean and of Guyana, whether it's race or class or religion or what have you.
The first principle, like the birth of the cosmos, is education.
La da 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 da. La da 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 da. La da 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 da. La da 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 da. La da 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 da. La da 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 da.